Hello, everybody. Terrence Lahue here with another episode of The Intellectual Agrarian, where we talk philosophy from the farm. Have you ever looked at a group of chickens and thought, I can keep these alive? Our guest today has prepared a course to teach you just how to do that and ensure that every chicken stays alive. Kunal Sampat is host of the Clinical Trials podcast, a backyard chicken grower and creator of the Raising Chickens training program, a service that can teach anyone what it takes to keep chickens happy and healthy. Together, we'll discuss what interested Kunal in raising poultry, what having chickens in an urban environment looks like, how clinical trials work, and so much more. Enjoy this episode with Kunal Sampat. Kunal, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Terrence. Thanks for having me on here.
Starting out, can you share a brief biographical sketch with the audience?
Sure. So I actually grew up in Mumbai, and for pretty much 17 years of my life, the first 17 years, and then I moved to Massachusetts for college. And obviously, it was a stark difference growing up in a busy city and then living in a place where there's a lot of space, relatively speaking. And then, I was always kind of, I loved the outdoors, probably like a lot of people do that are listening to this show. And I didn't quite figure out what it was about the outdoors that I liked. And then I moved to California, maybe after college. And then I had a manager who was born and raised in Tennessee. And he used to commute to work. So basically he was here a few days a week. And then a few days a week he was in Tennessee. And I kind of got intrigued by what he did. And there was an opportunity for me to visit Tennessee. And I just fell in love with Tennessee. I was like, this is awesome. How can somebody not live here? And then, I got married and I talked to my wife and she's like, no way, we're not moving from sunny California to Tennessee. And I said, well, I want to get chickens. And I think after a year of contemplation, she agreed. She thought we could give it a try. And basically, I ordered chickens online, baby chicks online. And that's kind of how we got started with raising backyard chickens.
So what was the impetus to raise chickens? Did you just want to be able to do something with agriculture? What was the impetus to it?
That's a great question. It was agricultural, I would say. I wanted to have a feel in my backyard, something that's more calming and rural. I think I've always wanted to live a very sustainable lifestyle. And I think that goes back to when I was in ninth grade. I started, I was part of a program in school that did composting. So basically, Cathay Pacific Airlines had given my school $1,000, which isn't a lot. And they had a team of people that were doing composting. And I think I enjoyed that whole process. So I started composting at home in my home in Mumbai. And that was an amazing experience. And because that led me to, I was able to, there was a journalist that got interested in my work, and then he did a publication in a local newspaper, and I just got hooked on it. So I kind of was missing that in my life between, just starting a job and then, finishing up college. I never got an opportunity to kind of continue that. And then we did my wife and I got certified composters from the county of Santa Clara, which was great. And we started doing vermiculture, which is having, earthworms in your, in a box. And then,
That's awesome.
You give them scraps and then it leads to, really golden soil. I think it's amazing, like golden manure. So we did that maybe for 2 years, I would say, which was pretty cool. And then we're like, now what? And I wanted to do something bigger than that. And that's kind of how I think that was my, the city of San Jose where I live, it's quite busy, I would say, compared to a lot of places in the United States. And I'm just, I need a break from the traffic and all of this. And I think chickens are quite calming and soothing in that sense.
They are. They're very soothing. I mean, there's something about their single-minded purpose to eat and pick at the dirt. That's very calming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I'm curious, you do live in San Jose. Were there any laws you had to work around for having backyard chickens?
So yes, so there are laws. I think there's laws pretty much in any major city around chickens. So they don't allow roosters in the city of San Jose, and you need to have limit your flock to 6 chickens if you don't want to get a permit. But if you want to get a permit, then it's more than 6 chickens. So if people want to raise their own flock, they want to check at their local city website. So I just put the city name in Google and say what's the small animal ordinance for that city, and they should be able to look it up pretty easily. I think most cities will allow 3 to 6 hens, which is the female chicken, but they may be not allowing roosters because of the noise pollution with the neighbors and stuff.
Yeah, probably your neighbors would get pretty annoyed if they woke up at like 5 to the sound of a rooster crowing. I can see that not ending well.
Yeah, but I'll tell you a funny story. We actually have a rooster, and he's illegal.
Oh, you have an illegal immigrant.
We do. We've had him for 5 years, and it's been quite a journey because we've as you know, we had 16 chickens when we got started, and that does require a permit, which meant that we had to have an inspector come into our house to just check on the chickens and just make sure there were no boys in the flock, and just that they were healthy and eating well, and so on and so forth. And we had to move our rooster. His name is Uggs, Uggs, like the shoe company. And we call him that because he has feathers all over his feet. Basically, we had to take him to like 4 streets down, when the inspector was going to be there, or move him to our neighbor's backyard, 10 houses down the street. And people love Uggs. He's actually doesn't make that much noise. I don't know why, but it's again, he's a boy. So, and we have neighbors that are from San Francisco that have moved in our neighborhood, and they say they just love it. Like they miss, like, if he wasn't there, they would miss that homely feeling of waking up to his voice and stuff. So, there's people like that love stuff like this. Our intent, we just didn't know what to do with the rooster. And I think the more I read about how bad their life is, it just makes me like cry, because when the hatcheries are raising chickens or trying to get these baby chicks hatched, obviously there's a 50% chance it will be a boy and 50% chance it will be a girl. And everybody wants the hens for the eggs, but then nobody wants the roosters, or fewer people want the roosters. And then they just end up putting them in, I think, like a machine, and they just kind of kill them live.
Oh.
Yeah, it's pretty gruesome. So, if people have space and they can actually accommodate some roosters, it's actually a pretty cool social dynamic with the hens and the roosters. And if your city does allow, I don't encourage people to do illegal things.
Thank you. We do not encourage doing illegal things.
Exactly. But yeah, if you can have, usually it's good to have like 1 rooster for every 10 or so hens. It's just quite healthy and fun to see them interact with each other.
Mm-hmm. Chickens have a lot more personality than I think most people would give them credit for.
Absolutely.
Now, you have what you call a 4 seasons chicken coop. What is it that makes it an all year round residence?
So the word 4 seasons chicken coop was had to do with more like a hotel, the 4 Seasons, hotel chain, and less to do with, maybe it is a 4 seasons in a sense from an all weather standpoint, but we have a pretty stable, or relatively mild winter. We don't get snow in San Jose.
I wonder what that's like. I have like a foot of it outside right now.
Yeah. So we call it the 4 seasons because I think we spend too much time and money trying to build the thing. And I don't think it's necessary. I think when you're starting off, you kind of don't know what to do, and then you just kind of go all at it. But I think we spend maybe $3,500 building it. And my wife is a landscape designer, so she wanted to get the landscape done. And I think that was like the number one mistake we made. Like, yeah, it's good to have plants and have the right plants for your chickens, but getting your paving and all that done, I mean, it's just not needed because the chickens are going to till the soil and do their chicken thing.
Mm-hmm. Chickens like doing
Exactly.
their chicken thing. Now, we're going to get back to the chicken shortly, but I also want to ask you about the clinical trials podcast that
Sure.
you host. What made you decide to start that?
I'm always interested in like niche areas, and how I can try to help people and provide value. And I have a background in managing clinical trials, for medical device and pharmaceutical products. And I there's information and knowledge that I have, and I think it would be an injustice to not share with other people. And in some ways it burns my heart because I go to these conferences, but I think people are not getting the right type of information, or they're just getting people are too distracted. And I wanted to make something more on demand for people, which is what the podcast does. They can listen to it whenever they are driving to work, or they have a few moments that are free during their day, rather than being pressured that, oh, I'm at a conference now, I need to learn everything I can. And it becomes like an informational overload for people, where the podcast is like little chunks of information that people can consume. And it's on demand. I mean, if you're having a certain issue on a certain topic, then you just go to that topic and listen to that episode, which I really like about the podcasting niche.
Podcaster, I agree. It makes it a lot easier for people. And I don't know about you, but I also consume probably more podcasts than I actually make, which it's good because it helps me know what people are looking for.
We're going to pause here a quick moment to share something great with you. Kunal's Backyard Chicken Course is now available to teach you everything you need to know about raising chickens, covering everything ranging from choosing the best backyard breed and designing your chicken coop to collecting eggs and getting the right city permits for your poultry projects. It's well thought out with great information. If you're even considering raising backyard chickens, do yourself and the chickens a favor by taking this course. We've got a special offer for you listeners here today. If at checkout you use offer code LAYHEW10, LAYHEW 10, you get $10 off the course. Again, that's LAYHEW 10 to get $10 off. Go to course.raising-chickens.com, or you can simply find the link to the course in the show notes. Now, back to the interview with Kunal Sampat.
We've said clinical trials a couple of different times. I'm not certain how many people actually understand what a clinical trial is. Would you mind explaining that?
Sure. Basically, a clinical trial is whenever companies that make a new drug or a medical device, they need to get that approved by the U.S. FDA in the case of United States. But different countries have different competent authorities. That's what they call them, basically government agencies. So in order for you to get your product or medical device approved by the government, you need to test it on an X number of population. So usually that number could be 50 patients, it could be 100 patients, it could be 1,000 patients, it could be 2,000 patients or more. And basically, that's what a clinical trial is. So you test the device or the drug on that patient, and then the results get published at a certain time point. So it's usually within a year or within 2 years, the results from the clinical study get published. And if the results look good, which means the patients have actually gotten better. So for example, if I had a heart attack, or if I participate in a clinical trial that's having a medical device for a heart attack, then the doctor will ask me, hey, do you want to do a clinical trial? And be like, yeah, I want to do a clinical trial. I want to help other people. I want to further medical research. And then I'll sign a consent form. I'll get a stent in my heart, and then me and then 1,000 other patients will do the exact same thing. And then a year later, the results get published, and every patient that got this heart stent is now doing exceptionally well and their health and well-being is excellent. But things can go the other way around too. Like they may not get better, and in that case, if things don't get better, then that device doesn't get approved and doesn't make it to the market. So that's kind of what's a clinical trial in a gist. The one thing I want to mention is it's not like you're not a guinea pig. So I think people feel like you're going to be a guinea pig, and you're not really a guinea pig, because they do a lot of like preclinical work. So they test these devices in animals like pigs and rats, and I mean, there's all these animals that are sacrificing themselves for you.
The other agriculture.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, does that answer your question, Terrence?
That does. And it's actually kind of funny because I have a friend of a friend who does something along those lines. He works with mice and insulin. So he's kind of doing that preclinical trial work in different studies. Now, what are some of the common difficulties and desired outcomes of a clinical trial? Obviously, you want to figure out, okay, is this something that is going to work for people?
Right.
But can you kind of walk me through a little bit of that process? What are some of the big roadblocks that can come up
in the process? So the number one thing is you can design a clinical trial, and you can say, and we're going to have 100 patients or 1,000 patients, and then go to the government agency and say, hey, what do you think? Does this design look good to you? Do you agree with the type of data we're collecting? And the agency could say flat out, no. They're like, no, 100 patients, this is way too little. We need 2,000 patients. and these companies have to spend a lot of money to put together a trial. And, they have to onboard hospitals that will do these trials. And if you're going to have a 2,000 patient trial, if it's, about $5,000 a patient, if you're only planning for 100 patients, you're looking at a completely different amount versus if you're planning for 2,000 patients. The financial impact is just way too large. And this is all upfront investment. You don't even know if your product is actually going to work, even after you do the 2,000 patients. So that's one of the number one challenges. The second one is, just being compliant with regulations. So you could do a clinical trial, you could have great data, all of that. But if you didn't comply with procedures in order to conduct the trial. So let me give you an example. So say if there's patients in the trial and they're not signing a consent form, that's a big no-no. That would trigger an audit right away, and that would that could shut down a company if they weren't getting patients to sign a consent form. So the consent form will basically explain what can happen to a patient if they got this device or this drug. Like, what are the good benefits and what's the bad stuff that could happen? Like, they could die potentially, right? So it's a responsibility of the company to make, and the physician to inform the patient of what the risk and benefits are of the trial. And if you don't comply with that procedure, then no matter what your data looks like and no matter how cool your product is, it's going to be a big issue. And I think the third one is, once all the data is out, you kind of have to make a story out of it. Does it align with what your initial theory was? So, there's a theory that's like a statistical theory that's in place saying, the results should, in 95% of the population, you can mimic these results. So say, because you're only testing it on 1,000 patients, what if those results don't really translate to 1 million or 5 million or 100 million people, right? And you don't want to be, you want to be 100% confident or 95% confident or higher, saying this can actually translate to all these patients. So that becomes that can be a little challenging depending on what the data looks like, because sometimes we're doing these trials in different hospitals and we're depending on other human beings to enter data into an online database. And what if they don't enter accurate data? What if they make a mistake? And then that has an impact on the overall data that's collected.
Now I'm curious, what's the normal sample size would you say, for a clinical trial? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? Is it 2,000?
Actually, there isn't really a normal sample size. It really varies based on the protocol, which is basically the protocol is basically the Bible of what is it that you're trying to, how are you going to conduct your trial? So, if, some devices or drugs are for rare diseases. So for those, I think you could even have as small as a 50-patient study or even a 5-patient trial because the diseases are so rare. So it's impossible to find those kind of patients.
Yeah.
But in other cases, the disease is highly prevalent, which also means there's more risk to the population, which means the government is going to make you do a trial with more, like a larger sample size. I think drug trials tend to be in the thousands, whereas device trials tend to be in the hundreds, if that helps.
That does. That's really interesting because I think a lot of people probably the most they understand about medicine comes from watching House. So it's probably helpful to have a little bit more of a better idea of how these systems work.
Right. And I think with House, there is some truth to it in terms of like what happened to the hospital, I suppose, and how decisions get made. But those products are probably already approved by the government. And then, but the stuff that you and I are talking about is what happens before.
Well, I guess they could also learn about it from watching Grey's Anatomy, but I'm not certain how accurate that is. I've never watched it.
Yeah. We don't have a TV at home. We watch chicken TV.
That's a good choice. Chickens are eminently more interesting. So, I'm kind of curious, has your clinical trial background kind of affected how you've raised chickens or your perspective on agriculture?
No, I don't think so. I think it's... although I think I tend to, because clinical trials, you're supposed to be quite precise when you're trying to manage trials. And I try to do my best when I'm trying to work with chickens also. I mean, they're pretty hardy birds, but I try to make sure that things are a bit more methodical, I would say. So, for example, if I'm traveling, I'll try to have a checklist of here are the 20 things that I need to make sure, or not 20, but 5 things or 10 things that the caretaker needs to do when I'm gone. And then in clinical trials, we do something similar. It's like, if you're a pilot, you're always like having checklists, like you check all these things before you take off. So in clinical trials, we do something similar. There's a lot of checklists, and you make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed before you kind of move on to the next thing. So I think maybe some of that, but obviously, everything that we do, all our previous experiences build up, and they somehow influence stuff that we're going to do down the road, right? I think it goes with anybody and everything.
Well, I think that's the fun part about in this greater world of agriculture, and it's really interesting as more and more people get into it, the diverse backgrounds and the lens that they bring in viewing what they do is built based on what they've done. So it's always interesting to see how they apply that to agriculture.
Yeah, so let me ask you a question. First, I have 2 questions. Can I ask those?
Oh, absolutely.
So do you have a different background than what you're doing right now? I was curious.
Oh, my background is almost wholly agriculture, but let's phrase it this way. Prior to agriculture, I was more likely to be destined to be an accountant or a literary professor. So I bring probably a slightly different tint to agriculture, but it's the way it goes.
Got it. And then do you feel agriculture is growing? I mean, is that what your read is on this? I'm curious where...
Agriculture is certainly growing because I think I read recently that, I'd like to say it was the Washington Post that published an article, that farming, there are more people going to farming now, like young people, millennials entering the farming industry, than have done so since the Great Depression.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's encouraging. It's nice to know that there are more people getting involved in agriculture. And it's nice to see individuals such as yourself who even are just raising backyard chickens, that's still making a difference.
Right.
I think it was Joel Salatin that said if 1 out of 3 homes in the United States had chickens for laying eggs, then there would be no reason for chicken barns.
Exactly.
They just wouldn't have to sell them. And I think that that's really good to note, because you learn something different when you see how your food is raised.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's that's the overarching objective. I think for me to put this core, basically raise chickens and encourage people to raise chickens is people need to understand how food gets on their table. And I think our society is quite ignorant of those things right now. And I think talking about like clinical trials, it's all kind of driven by the health laws and stuff like that. And those health laws, subset of those also apply to, the food industry, right? And then that impacts the agricultural industry. And when food is, for example, at Whole Foods, when food is left out, I'm sure for a certain amount of time, they have to dump it. And I don't think most consumers really get to see that part of the equation. Like they just think, oh yeah, food is infinite. There's a lot of it. We don't have to worry about it.
Now, I want to start talking about your program, your course. What made you decide to make this course for people to understand how to raise backyard chickens?
That's a great question. So there's a few different things that prompted me my wife and I, to put this course together for raising backyard chickens. I think the number one reason we already talked about just now about, trying to get people to understand where their food is coming from and really growing their own food. In this case, eggs, or if, they're going to use chickens for meat, then they could basically slaughter them themselves or have a butcher do it. My number 2 reason was, we wanted to have a bigger farm, but there's a huge demand for fresh eggs, at least where I live, and I'm sure that demand is probably everywhere else. Because people want to eat healthy food. Like we talk about millennials, they're really wanting to eat non-GMO certified organic food, right? And they want to get food from animals that have been treated well. And we wanted to do that, but our limitation was space, and there's only so much space we have. Our yard is relatively tiny compared to like a lot of homes probably in other parts of the country. So we said we couldn't do that. So we applied actually for a piece of land to lease. It was a 35-acre plot, I think, or 74-acre, 74-acre plot in the Northern California area. And obviously, we don't have a farming background, so even our proposal, we had a pretty in detail proposal, but it still got rejected, which is fine because we probably weren't ready for it. So we said, well, we can get the land. We can raise the chickens, but then we're vegetarian, so we didn't want to kill them either. I think that's a stance that my wife had taken, and she didn't feel comfortable killing them. And I think that is it can vary from person to person because, a lot of people eat meat, and I have no objections with people eating meat. It's just a lifestyle, choice that I've made. So we said, well, even if we had a farm, we couldn't kill these chickens because if we're going to keep producing eggs for people, we call our chickens like happy hens. We call it where hens have a life. That's what we call our farm. And say, well, if we kill our chickens, we can't give them, they can't have a good life, because we're artificially killing them or slaughtering them. So the only other option was like, let's use some of our technical skills. I'm pretty good with, getting better with using the internet, I would say, and, doing videos. I think there's, it's not, we made our whole course using our iPhone, but it's actually pretty high quality. My wife knows a lot of, Adobe software tools. So she said she's happy to take on this project. So the two of us have different skill sets. She's a designer, landscape designer. So she kind of understands how plants work and what would be good for the chickens and stuff. So we said, let's put all our creative energy into putting an online course and let's get more people involved in doing this, because that probably is going to have a much broader impact than just doing it in it's too good to do it in your community and have a farm of your own and do all these. And I think we would one day do that. But right now, given the resources we had available, this was the best thing. So going back to your comment about Joel Saltin about, if every home had a backyard, then, the factory farms would be non-existing, right? So that's my dream. I would say I would like us to get there one day and that's one step forward, I think, with this course, that I want to encourage people to raise chickens, and the course, it's people can get this information by reading books. There's no doubt about it. That's how I learned a lot of things. But the information is so scattered. And if you like doing online searches on forums and YouTube videos, you can get stuff, but it's not kind of in one place. And right now our brains are so, we don't have that much attention. Like we're constantly like playing with our phone and watching TV and getting distracted by our kids. And I think that's why I did this online course. I was like, I want to give people like bite-sized information similar to the podcasting that they can go on demand and get it and then get going. Like I want to remove that. Oh no, it's so much work to get started. Like I want to make it like as easy as possible for them to be able to do this.
And that's great. I mean, you've really made it easier for people to do this because the knowledge is half of the equation.
Right.
I mean, think of it. One thing, I used to do farmers markets. That's part of my background in this. And people are so intimidated by the idea of cooking a whole chicken. And it's not that the whole chicken is necessarily this grand monster of a feat to cook, but they just don't know how.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing that applies to raising a backyard chicken. It's not that it's so much work that you can't do it. It's that they just don't have the education or resources usually to know how to do it. And so what you've done is provided a method for someone who's an almost complete novice in the idea to have the opportunity to learn. And that gets them that first step forward.
Exactly. Yep.
Kunal, thank you so much for being on the show. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we go?
I think I have a resource that I wanted to share with people. It's a book that I accidentally stumbled upon recently. It's called The Small Scale Poultry Flock by Harvey Ussery, Ussery. I think it's a phenomenal book. I would highly recommend people if they do decide to raise chickens. And obviously you could look up for my course on raisingchickens.com. That Terrence will put a link hopefully in the show notes. But I think this book is amazing, and it's really shifted the way I think about raising poultry.
And we will have all that information linked in the show notes. Thanks again, Kunal, for being on the show. Also, if you're interested in clinical trials, be sure to take a look at his podcast.
So awesome. Thanks, Terrence. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
Big thanks to Kunal for being on the show. You can check out his backyard chicken program by using the link below or go to course.raising-chickens.com. Use our special offer code LAHU10 to get $10 off. Links to his farm and the Clinical Trials podcast can be found in the show notes. If you haven't already, please leave a review on whatever listening medium you use, especially iTunes and Apple Podcasts. While you're there, be sure to subscribe regardless of listening medium to keep up to date with the show. Thanks again for listening. This has been Terrence Lahue and the Intellectual Agrarian reminding you to keep farming the dream.